The light in the studio felt a little different that morning. It was still bright and clean and soft, but there was a quiet weight in the air, like everyone was holding a breath without knowing why. The polished floor reflected the white panels above, and yet the shine looked duller than usual, as if the day had decided to move a little slower. Somewhere between the cameras and the empty chairs, a gentle tension floated, light as dust, but impossible to ignore. It was the kind of feeling that made a person stop for a moment, listen to nothing, and still feel that something was about to change. Sandra Bullock stood near one of the tall light stands, her hands resting loosely on a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. She was not late, she was not rushed, she had her lines, her costume, everything in place. But inside, it felt like her heart was walking ahead of her, leaving her body a few steps behind. She watched people moving around the set, adjusting lights, checking cables, arranging props, and all of it felt distant, like a show she knew well but could not enter yet. Normally, she greeted everyone with warmth and humor, but today her smile came a second too late and faded a second too early. Keanu Reeves noticed that second. He was standing by a monitor listening to a short note from the assistant director, but his eyes kept drifting back to Sandra. He had worked with her long enough to know her rhythms, the small signs that others might miss. The way she tilted her head when she was curious, the slight curve of her mouth when she was amused, the focused stillness when she was building a scene in her mind. Today there was another kind of stillness around her, not creative, not calm, but careful. As if she was tired and trying very hard not to show it. The noise on the set was not loud, but it was steady, chairs sliding, pages turning, soft footsteps on tape marks on the floor. Somewhere in the background, someone laughed at a small joke, but even that laugh felt thinner than usual. A few people stole quick glances at Sandra, then looked away, unsure if they were imagining something different about her. No one said anything because nothing was clearly wrong, yet no one could shake the feeling that something was just out of place. Sandra glanced at the digital clock near the entrance of the stage and watched the numbers change, though she was not really reading them. Her fingers tightened around the paper cup, and she felt the cardboard press into her skin. She thought about the envelope inside her bag, the one she had folded and unfolded so many times that the edges had become soft. That envelope held the words that had changed her last few months, and now those same words were pressing on her chest, asking to be spoken out loud. She was not sure if she was ready, but she knew she could not delay forever. She took a slow breath and told herself that she had always faced hard moments with honesty. This should be the same, yet something about this was different. This time it was not just a private decision or a quiet change. This time her truth would touch many people around her, and it would affect their work, their time, their plans. She did not want to be the reason for trouble. She did not want anyone to think she was weak, but hiding was starting to feel heavier than speaking. Keanu walked over to the catering table and picked up a small bottle of water, more as an excuse to move closer than from real thirst. He stood a few feet away from Sandra, giving her space, but close enough that she could see him if she looked up. When she finally raised her eyes, their gazes met for a brief moment. There was no dramatic stare, no spoken question, only a quiet recognition, like two people hearing the same distant sound and knowing it meant something. In that short connection, Keanu saw the tiredness under her eyes, the tightness around her mouth that she was trying to hide with a soft smile. He had seen her work through long days, tough roles, emotional scenes, but this felt different. There was a private storm inside her, and he could sense she was trying to stand still while it moved around her. He did not know yet what it was, but he knew it was real. The director called for a short break before the first big scene of the day. People began to move in different directions, some checking messages on their phones, others adjusting costumes or chatting in small groups. The usual pre-shoot energy floated around, but now it felt like two currents were flowing at the same time, one normal and familiar and one quieter and tense, wrapped around Sandra. Sandra stepped aside, closer to a corner where a tall black curtain hung. She took her phone from her pocket and unlocked the screen. A message from her doctor sat near the top, the same one she had read so many times that she knew every line by heart. It spoke of a condition that was not life-ending but life-changing, something that explained her exhaustion, her dizziness on some days, the strange way her body had been reacting to stress. The plan was clear. She needed treatment, rest, balance. But the project they were working on did not understand words like rest and balance very well. She thought of the long nights, the tight schedule, the expectation that she would always be ready to perform. She had been trying to keep up, to ignore the heaviness in her chest, the trembling in her hands, the way her thoughts sometimes slipped away when she needed them most. But the weight of pretending was becoming harder than the truth. Still, the fear of being a problem held her back. She worried that if she spoke up, people might see her as fragile or worse, as a burden. Keanu watched her from a distance for a few moments longer, then quietly walked over, his steps slow and natural. He stopped at a respectful space beside her and asked in a calm voice how she was holding up. He did not press, he did not ask what was wrong, he simply gave her a chance to share if she wished. Sandra hesitated, then said she was fine, just a little tired. The words sounded light, but her eyes betrayed a different story. Keanu felt it, and his heart responded with a quiet resolve. He knew she would talk when she was ready, and until then, he would simply remain near. Someone from production approached and informed Sandra that the producers wanted a brief word with her in the conference room above the set before they began serious filming. The request was polite, but the timing felt heavy. Sandra nodded and said she would be there in a few minutes. As the person walked away, she felt her throat tighten. She had known this conversation was coming. She had asked for it. She had told them she needed to share something important with the whole team. Now the moment was finally close. She looked at Keanu and for a second allowed herself to show the worry she had been holding back. She admitted softly that she had something serious to tell everyone and that she was afraid of how they might react. Keanu listened without interrupting. He did not try to fix it with quick comfort. Instead, he told her that honesty was never something to be ashamed of, and that real respect did not disappear when life became complicated. His words were simple, but they settled into her heart like a gentle anchor. Inside the conference room, a few producers and department heads were already gathering. Through the glass window above the set, Sandra could see them taking seats, opening laptops, glancing at notes. She imagined the look on their faces when she told them she might need to slow down, that she might not always be able to meet the hardest demands of the schedule. She worried that they would see her not as a person trying to stay healthy, but as a challenge to their plans. The thought made her chest feel tight again. Still, in the middle of her fear, there was a small, quiet strength. She reminded herself that this announcement was not about weakness. It was about truth. It was about choosing to face reality instead of hiding from it. She had always believed in standing up for others when they were struggling. Now it was her turn to stand up for herself, even if her voice shook. Keanu placed a gentle hand near her shoulder without pulling her close, a respectful gesture that simply said he was there. He told her that whatever she chose to say, she would not be alone in that room. He did not promise that everyone would understand right away. He did not promise that things would be easy. He only promised that he would stand beside her fully and quietly as a friend and as a colleague. As Sandra walked toward the stairs leading to the conference room, the air around the set felt even more still. Some crew members watched her climb, sensing that something important was about to happen, though they did not know what. Keanu followed a few steps behind, giving her space, yet making his presence clear. To anyone watching, it looked like two professionals heading to a routine meeting. But inside, for both of them, each step felt like a step into a new chapter. When Sandra reached the door of the conference room, she paused with her hand on the handle. She could hear faint voices inside, the soft shuffle of papers, the distant hum of air conditioning. She took one more breath, felt the weight of the envelope in her bag and the quiet strength of Keanu standing just behind her. In that small pause, she made a decision. She would tell the truth, even if her voice was not perfectly steady, and she would let herself accept the support being offered to her. She opened the door and stepped inside, the eyes of the room turning toward her, waiting for her to speak, while Keanu moved to stand where he knew he needed to be. The room felt warmer than the hallway outside, yet Sandra sensed a coolness settling under her skin as every pair of eyes lifted toward her. The producers sat around a long glass table, laptops open, papers spread out in neat stacks, their expressions polite but curious. The air carried a quiet echo of expectation. She closed the door gently behind her, and for a moment the soft click sounded louder than all the voices in her mind. She stood still, letting herself adjust to the weight of the moment. Keanu entered a few seconds later, taking a seat at the far end of the table, not beside her, not overshadowing her, only present in a way that felt grounding. He gave her a steady look, the kind that said she had time, she had space, and she had support. Something in her chest loosened just a little. The head producer asked if she was ready to begin. His tone was respectful, but Sandra knew he was also tracking the schedule in the back pocket of his thoughts. She nodded and stepped closer to the table. Her fingers brushed the edge of her bag where the envelope waited, folded and worn, carrying the truth she had carried alone for weeks. She hesitated before speaking, choosing her words with care so they would not collapse under the pressure she felt. She started by thanking everyone for their work and their patience. She told them how much the project meant to her, how deeply she valued each person in the room. As she spoke, her voice stayed steady, but her hands trembled slightly. She clasped them together behind her back, hoping no one would notice, though Keanu did. He leaned forward just enough to show he was paying attention, not to interrupt, but to witness. Then she shared it. She told them she had been managing a medical condition for several months, something that caused fatigue and episodes of dizziness, something that required treatment and balance. She explained she had tried to push through because she did not want to slow anyone down, but pretending had become too heavy. Her breath almost broke at that part. She said she might need small adjustments in her schedule, perhaps a lighter load on certain days. She apologized for any difficulty this might cause. For a moment, no one moved. The room held its breath again, just like the set downstairs. The first reaction came from a younger associate producer who placed his pen down and nodded with genuine understanding. He said they appreciated her honesty and would work around whatever she needed. His voice sounded warm and uncomplicated, and it gave Sandra a faint sense of relief. But not all faces reflected the same softness. One of the senior producers leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Another whispered something to her colleague, a short comment followed by a tight nod. Sandra caught the whisper, but not the words. She felt that small sting she had feared. She wondered if she should have stayed silent. She wondered if she had disrupted something important. Keanu noticed the shifting atmosphere and straightened slightly, not confronting anyone, not speaking yet, but preparing himself. He could feel the change in the room, the subtle shift in tone, the cautious way some people adjusted their posture as if calculating the impact of her announcement. He knew those calculations well. He had seen them many times in the industry. Numbers, timelines, deadlines, budgets. And then there was the human being standing in front of them, balancing her health with her work, her dignity with her fear. The head producer cleared his throat and asked gently for clarification. He wanted to know what kind of adjustments she expected and how often. His voice was calm but firm, a reminder that the project was large and complex. Sandra explained as clearly as she could, telling them she did not need to stop working, only that there would be days when she might move a little slower or need slightly more rest between scenes. For a few seconds, silence fell again. Sandra felt the silence like a weight pressing across her shoulders. She wished she could step out of her own body and watch this moment from a place where the fear did not feel so sharp. Then someone finally spoke. A senior crew coordinator said that the team had handled difficult schedules before and could adapt again. Her tone held respect, not pity. Sandra felt gratitude warm her chest. Another producer offered a tentative smile, agreeing that they could shift things if needed. Still, one voice remained quiet. The same producer who had leaned back earlier sat with his arms crossed, giving no sign of support or concern. When he finally spoke, his words were polite but carried an edge. He said they would do their best but hoped this would not lead to significant delays. The phrase hung in the air like a thin thread pulled too tightly. Sandra felt a pinch inside her, but she forced herself to remain steady. Before she could respond, Keanu stood, not abruptly, not loudly. He rose with calm intent and addressed the room. He said that Sandra had shown courage by being honest and that the team should honor that courage with understanding. He reminded them that a film was not only made of schedules and equipment, but of people who gave their hearts and energy to create something meaningful. His voice remained calm, but there was something in it that made every person listen without interrupting. He added that if adjustments were needed to keep the project healthy, he would adjust his own schedule as well. He said no one should carry extra weight alone, especially when they were already trying their best to keep moving forward. Sandra felt a wave of emotion she had been holding back swirl through her. The room shifted again, this time with more warmth than tension. Even the hesitant producer softened his posture after hearing Keanu speak. He nodded slowly and said they would find a way to make it work. Sandra felt her breath return more naturally. This was not perfect acceptance from everyone, but it was real progress. The hardest part had been speaking the truth. Now the truth was out and the world had not collapsed. She looked at Keanu and met his eyes for a brief moment, finding a quiet comfort there. As the meeting ended, people stood and gathered their notes. A few approached Sandra and offered gentle words of support. Others simply nodded with respect. She felt a mix of relief and exhaustion, like someone who had been carrying a heavy load and had finally set it down, even if only for a moment. When she stepped outside the conference room with Keanu beside her, the air in the hallway felt lighter. She exhaled slowly, letting herself feel the small victory of telling her truth. But a faint uneasiness remained inside her, a whisper that there might be more challenges ahead, more reactions, more pressure from those who had not shown their true thoughts yet. As they walked down the stairs back toward the set, one of the junior assistants hurried past them, carrying a stack of printed papers. One sheet slipped from the pile and drifted onto the floor near their feet. Keanu picked it up without thinking. His eyes scanned the page, and something in his expression changed. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his pocket before Sandra could see it. He did not want to worry her yet, not until he knew exactly what this paper meant. Sandra continued walking, unaware, feeling a fragile hope settling inside her. The hallway lights reflected softly on the floor as the two of them stepped back toward the set where the rest of the team waited. They did not know yet that the hardest part of the day was still approaching. The sounds of the studio felt slightly sharper when Sandra and Keanu walked back in. Lights hummed above them, footsteps echoed across the polished floor, and the faint smell of fresh paint from a newly adjusted backdrop lingered in the air. Everything looked normal, yet something invisible pressed against the atmosphere, like a thin layer of tension settling quietly on top of ordinary life. Sandra tried to shake it off, telling herself she had done the right thing. But her body still carried the echo of that meeting, the tightness in her chest, the strange silence between supportive and uncertain faces. Keanu stayed close but not intrusive, matching her pace with a calm awareness that made the world feel a little steadier. He watched her breathe out slowly, watched her shoulders relax just enough to show she was trying. He did not mention the paper in his pocket, not yet. He wanted to understand it before he added another weight to her day. The crew began preparing for the next scene, adjusting cameras and aligning marks on the floor. Sandra looked over the script in her hand, but the words blurred for a moment. Her mind drifted back to the conference room, to the polite support and the silent doubts. She wondered which reactions were genuine and which were carefully shaped behind professional smiles. She wondered if any of them saw her announcement as a personal failure. The thought made her heart beat a little faster. As she took her position on set, a small group of crew members stood near the sound booth, whispering quietly. The whispers were not sharp or judgmental, but they held a kind of curiosity that felt heavy. Sandra caught fragments of their tone and swallowed hard. She did not want to be the subject of quiet conversations. She wanted to work, to give her best, to feel normal. But today normal felt like a distant shape she could almost see but not reach. The director called for rehearsal and Sandra stepped into the scene. She delivered her lines with a soft, natural flow, though her emotional focus wavered around the edges. Keanu noticed the slight tremble in her breath on one of the lines. The director, sensitive to the life beneath performance, paused and asked gently if she wanted a short break. Sandra shook her head with a brief smile, insisting she was fine. She was not, but she wanted to be. As the crew reset the scene, Keanu walked toward a quiet corner of the set where the paper he had found earlier still pressed against his pocket. He pulled it out and carefully unfolded it. It was a printed email, partially cut off at the margins, likely picked up by accident when the assistant gathered documents. The message was not addressed to him or Sandra, but the few visible lines carried a tone he did not like. It mentioned concerns about Sandra's condition, questioning whether she could handle the physical demands of the remaining shoot. It spoke of potential delays, insurance concerns, and whispers from certain investors who were beginning to feel uneasy. The wording was cold, clinical, lacking empathy. But what troubled Keanu most was the final line, faint but clear enough to read. It suggested exploring alternative casting options if Sandra became too much of a risk. Keanu folded the paper slowly, pressing it between his palms as if trying to quiet the anger rising inside him. The words were harsh, dismissive, so far from the respect Sandra deserved. He knew she had just opened her heart to the team with honesty and vulnerability, and somewhere in the same building, someone had already begun discussing ways to phase her out. It made his jaw tighten, his breath deepen. He forced himself to remain calm. He needed clarity before confronting anyone. When he returned to the set, Sandra was standing alone near the main camera, adjusting a small clip on her sleeve. She smiled lightly at a passing crew member, but Keanu could see the tiredness under the surface. He walked closer and asked softly if she needed water or a minute to rest. She thanked him and said she was all right, though the word held only half its meaning. Keanu considered showing her the paper, but stopped himself. Revealing it right now would break her fragile focus, and the day was far from over. The next rehearsal began, and Sandra stepped gracefully into her mark. The scene required her to walk across the set, pause near a window frame, and deliver an emotional line. She reached the window with steady steps and took a breath. But as she lifted her eyes, something strange caught her attention. The set lights above flickered for half a second, a sharp, brief flash that made several people look up. It was subtle, but the shift in brightness startled her. The flicker was followed by a faint, crackling sound in the wiring. The director signaled to stop immediately. Technicians rushed in, checking cables and connections. Sandra stepped back with caution, her heartbeat rising. She had been on sets long enough to recognize when equipment behaved in ways that were not normal. This did not feel like a random glitch. It felt deliberate, or at least suspicious. Keanu moved closer, scanning the equipment with concern. He asked the nearest technician what had caused it. The technician said the wiring seemed to have been adjusted recently. He sounded uncertain, as if hesitant to blame anyone but equally unsure whether this was a natural technical issue. The uncertainty created an uneasy hush across the set. Sandra watched the technician's work, her hands clasped together. She tried to focus on her breathing, telling herself she was safe, that nothing serious had happened. Yet the sense of something hidden and unsettling grew inside her. The announcement she had made earlier had changed the energy around her. She could feel it. Some people were supportive, some confused, some quietly worried. But someone somewhere seemed to be pushing the pressure just a little further. After a few minutes, the director encouraged everyone to take a short break while the equipment was checked thoroughly. Sandra stepped aside and found a seat on a small wooden crate near the props table. She let her shoulders drop and closed her eyes for a second. She felt Keanu sit beside her, not too close, but close enough to offer comfort without crowding her space. He asked gently how she was feeling. She told him she felt a little shaken but was trying to stay steady. Keanu nodded with understanding. He debated whether to tell her about the email, but he chose to wait until they were somewhere quieter. She needed clarity, not added fear in the middle of a chaotic set. As they sat there, a junior crew member approached, nervously. He held a clipboard and hesitated before speaking. He apologized for interrupting and then told Sandra that he admired her honesty earlier. He said hearing her speak helped him realize he had been ignoring a health issue of his own because he feared judgment. His voice trembled with sincerity. Sandra felt warmth rise inside her and thanked him for sharing. The moment softened the tension in her heart, reminding her that truth could create connection, even in unexpected places. But just as the young man walked away, one of the senior producers descended the stairs to the set. His expression was tight, focused, almost impatient. He scanned the area until his eyes landed on Sandra. He walked over briskly and asked if she had a moment. His tone was controlled, polite, but something beneath it felt pressing. Keanu rose to stand beside her. The producer hesitated before speaking, as if weighing each word. He said they needed to discuss a few things regarding scheduling and insurance, given what she had shared earlier. He insisted it was standard procedure, nothing personal, but the way he said it made Sandra's stomach tighten again. The producer then asked her to come to his office after the break to review some documents. Sandra nodded quietly, though her chest filled with unease. As the producer walked away, Keanu looked at Sandra with steady concern. He knew this was connected to the email in his pocket. The pieces were beginning to form a pattern, and the pattern was not kind. He decided that before the day grew heavier, she needed to know the truth he carried. But he also knew this truth would change the direction of everything. The break ended slowly as people returned to the set, but the tension from the earlier flicker in the lights still hung in the air. Sandra tried to focus on her breathing as she walked with Keanu toward a quieter hallway. Her steps were steady, yet her mind kept replaying the producer's expression, the careful tone he used, the sense that something was being prepared behind closed doors. She wanted to believe everything would be handled respectfully, but her instincts told her the path ahead was not going to be simple. Keanu waited until they reached a small corner near the wardrobe area, a place where the noise of the set faded just enough for them to talk. Sandra stood beside a rack of costumes, lightly touching the fabric of a jacket as if grounding herself. Keanu watched her for a moment, then reached into his pocket and unfolded the page he had found earlier. He spoke gently, choosing each word with care, telling her he had come across something important and that she deserved to see it. Sandra looked at the paper with a mix of confusion and caution. When he handed it to her, she held it carefully, her fingers tightening around the edges as she read. The words hit her slowly at first. Concerns about her condition, risks for the project, questions about whether she could continue. And then the line that made her breath catch, suggestions of considering alternative casting options. Her chest tightened, her eyes lowered to the floor. The weight she had been fearing, the silent judgment she had hoped would not appear, now sat right in her hands. She swallowed hard and tried to steady her voice, but her words came out soft and fragile. She asked Keanu if he knew who wrote this or why it had been printed. Keanu shook his head and told her he did not know the full story, only that the tone and intent were wrong, and that this should never have been discussed without her present or aware. Sandra closed her eyes for a moment. She had prepared herself for mixed reactions, for questions, for scheduling concerns, but she had not prepared herself for the thought of being quietly replaced. She felt something inside her flicker, like a light dimming under pressure. She wondered if honesty had placed her in the position she feared most. She wondered if the people she trusted to value her work were already turning away. Keanu stepped a little closer, his voice calm but firm. He told her that the printed message did not represent the entire team. He told her she was respected, valued, and wanted, and that anyone who thought otherwise had forgotten the humanity behind the work they were doing. He said he would not allow decisions to be made in shadows that affected her future. His words were steady, but his eyes held a quiet fire. Before they could speak further, the same senior producer reappeared at the far end of the hallway, gesturing that he was ready to meet. Sandra folded the paper quickly and slipped it into her bag. She stood straighter, though the worry still lingered behind her expression. Keanu walked beside her as they entered the small office, a room cluttered with schedules, budgets, and stacks of scripts. The producer sat behind his desk, offering a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. He gestured for Sandra to sit while Keanu remained standing, choosing a spot against the wall where he could observe the conversation. The producer began by acknowledging her announcement earlier, saying he appreciated her transparency. Then his tone shifted slightly as he explained the challenges of accommodating changes in the schedule. He mentioned costs, timelines, and pressure from external partners. Each word felt like a soft layer of distance between them. Sandra listened quietly, nodding when appropriate, but inside she felt the tension building. She did not want special treatment. She did not want anyone to bend rules for her. She only wanted fairness. She wanted understanding. She wanted respect. The producer then mentioned something that made Sandra's pulse quicken. He said he had been advised to review all options to protect the project, including potential adjustments in casting if the situation became too unpredictable. He delivered the words calmly, almost gently, as if presenting an ordinary business decision. But to Sandra, the words cut deep. Before she could respond, Keanu stepped forward. His voice remained respectful, but there was a weight in it that made the producer look up immediately. Keanu said that considering alternative casting without speaking to Sandra directly was not only premature but profoundly unfair. He reminded the producer that the entire industry respected Sandra not just for her talent, but for her consistency, professionalism, and heart. He said the project would lose more than time if it lost its soul. The producer tried to explain that he was only following protocol, but Keanu did not step back. He kept his tone calm, steady, unwavering. He said protocol should never erase compassion. He said schedules and budgets were important, but people were more important. He said Sandra had given everything to the project, and the least she deserved was loyalty. Sandra felt a warmth rise through her chest, a mix of gratitude and relief. She watched Keanu stand there, not raising his voice, not threatening anyone, just speaking truth with quiet strength. His presence changed the room. Even the producer shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his glasses and clearing his throat before continuing. The producer softened his words after that. He said they would explore ways to support her without jumping to conclusions. He said the casting review was only a precaution, not a plan. Sandra listened carefully, knowing some of his words were shaped by Keanu's presence. But she also sensed that not everything had been said. There were still concerns he was not expressing out loud. When the meeting finally ended, Sandra walked out of the office with a mixture of exhaustion and clarity. Keanu followed closely, watching her expression with care. She told him she felt shaken but grateful. She said she did not expect him to speak for her, but she was thankful he had done so. Keanu replied that standing beside a friend was never an obligation. It was a choice he made without hesitation. As they returned to the set, a soft murmur moved through the crew. People turned their heads, their expressions more watchful now. Sandra felt the shift. It was not hostile, but it carried questions, uncertainty, maybe even worry. She wondered how many had heard fragments of discussions upstairs. She wondered how many were already imagining possibilities she did not want to face. The director approached them and asked gently if they were ready to resume. Sandra nodded. She wanted to work. She wanted to show she was still strong. She wanted to prove to herself more than anyone else that she could continue. But as she stepped back into the set, something felt different. A quiet unease rested beneath the surface, like the first sign of a storm gathering out of sight. She did not know yet how heavy that storm would become. And neither did Keanu. The set felt calm for a brief moment when Sandra and Keanu returned, but beneath that calm was a soft, trembling energy, something almost invisible yet undeniable. The lights had been repaired, the crew stood ready, and the director signaled for everyone to take their places. Still, Sandra sensed a quiet shift in how people moved around her. Their smiles were polite, their voices gentle, but their eyes carried questions they did not dare ask aloud. She tried to focus on her script, but her thoughts kept circling back to the producer's words and the printed email now tucked inside her bag. Keanu stayed close, though not in a way that drew attention. He walked beside her when she returned to her mark on the floor, his presence steady like a quiet shield. Sandra felt grateful for that. Even without speaking, she felt less alone in the weight she carried. She wondered how the day would continue, how much more pressure might unfold, but she also knew she had to stay present, to stay grounded, to keep giving her best. The director called action for a simple emotional scene. Sandra took a slow breath and stepped into her character, letting the world around her blur for a moment. She walked across the set toward a small wooden table, each step deliberate and smooth. The camera followed her gently. Keanu entered the scene from the opposite side, ready to meet her at the center. Everything felt steady. Everything felt safe. Until it didn't. As Sandra approached the table, a sudden sharp snap echoed above her. She froze. A metal clamp from the lighting rig dropped from the height of the catwalk, slicing through the air with dangerous speed. Gasps scattered across the set. A second clamp shook loose, then another, clattering down inches from where Sandra's foot had been just seconds before. Before she could react, Keanu moved. He did not run, he did not panic. He stepped forward with calm precision and pulled her away from the falling equipment, guiding her safely into the empty space behind a large set pillar. The moment happened so fast that Sandra hardly understood it. All she knew was the strong, steady feeling of Keanu's hands on her arms, holding her upright and away from danger. The crew rushed in immediately. The director shouted for all lights to be powered down. Technicians grabbed ladders and safety gear. The set buzzed with alarm. Sandra stared at the spot she had been standing just moments before, her pulse racing, her breath unsteady. The clamps were heavy, solid metal. If one had hit her, the injury could have been serious. Keanu kept a gentle hand near her shoulder, not gripping, not overwhelming, just making sure she did not fall from the shock. He asked softly if she was hurt. She shook her head. She felt shaken but unharmed. Keanu nodded with relief, though the tension in his jaw said he was far from calm. The technicians examined the rig above. Their faces grew serious as they inspected the area where the clamps had been attached. One technician climbed down and whispered something to the head of lighting. The head of lighting frowned and shook his head in disbelief. Sandra watched them from a distance, her anxiety growing with each passing second. Finally, the lighting head approached the director and spoke quietly, but Keanu heard enough to understand. The clamps had not fallen by accident. Someone had loosened them, not enough to make it obvious, but enough to make the rig unstable, enough to turn a working day into a dangerous one. The director's expression darkened with concern. He immediately called for a security sweep of the equipment. Sandra felt her heart tighten again, this time with fear rather than sadness. Someone had tampered with the set. Someone had tested her limits earlier in the day with rumors and pressure. Now it felt like the pressure had turned into something else, something far more frightening. Keanu stepped closer, lowering his voice. He asked Sandra how much she had told people about her condition before today. She said she had told no one except the producers. Her voice shook a little as she spoke. Keanu listened with quiet focus. He reminded her gently that sometimes people acted out of fear rather than cruelty, but this time fear had turned into recklessness, and recklessness had almost caused real harm. The director approached Sandra and Keanu and apologized sincerely for the incident. He insisted they halt filming for the rest of the afternoon until the rigging team inspected every piece of equipment. He said he wanted no risks, no chances, no danger. His voice trembled with concern. Sandra felt touched by his sincerity, but it did little to calm the storm forming inside her. As the crew began clearing equipment, Sandra stepped aside and sat on a nearby bench. Her hands trembled slightly as she rested them on her knees. The world felt unsteady. She had come into the day trying to speak her truth with courage. Now she felt like the ground beneath her feet had shifted into uncertainty. She wondered if her presence on the project had created tension she never intended. She wondered if the quiet concerns of others had twisted into something more dangerous. Keanu sat beside her, leaving enough space to let her breathe. He watched her with calm patience. He did not try to fill the silence with comforting words. Instead, he let her find her breath again, slowly, until her shoulders relaxed slightly. Then he spoke. He told her that what happened was not her fault. He told her that sabotage was never justified, not by fear, not by frustration, not by pressure. He told her she had every right to work, to be honest, to take care of herself. Sandra looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. She whispered that she felt like she was becoming a burden, even though she never intended to be. Keanu shook his head gently. He said she was not a burden. She was a human being navigating a difficult moment with strength. He said anyone who saw her honesty as a weakness misunderstood what strength truly was. Their conversation was interrupted by a young technician who had been part of the inspection team. He approached nervously and spoke in a low voice. He admitted something unsettling. Earlier that morning, he had overheard two people discussing Sandra's announcement in hushed tones, speaking about the possibility of pressure tactics. He did not know who they were, but he remembered their frustration about delays and investor concerns. Sandra felt a cold wave wash through her. Pressure tactics. The words echoed uncomfortably. Keanu asked the technician if he could describe the voices or give clues, but the young man seemed uncertain. Still, the information added another layer to the growing pattern of the day. The director returned with updates. They would delay filming until tomorrow. They wanted to check every rig, every fixture, every panel. Sandra appreciated the caution, but she could not shake the feeling that someone wanted her to step aside. Someone wanted her to feel unsafe, unwelcome, or too complicated to manage. As the crew slowly packed up equipment, Keanu stayed close to her. He told her gently that they needed to decide together how to move forward. He said he would not let fear or manipulation push her out of something she loved. He said she had earned her place here through years of hard work and deep dedication. Sandra breathed slowly, letting the weight of the day settle into something she could hold. She realized that she could not walk through this quietly. She needed strength. She needed honesty. She needed allies, and she was not alone. She stood up and looked at Keanu, her voice calm but stronger than before. She said she was ready to face whatever came next. She said she would not let fear decide her future. Keanu nodded with quiet pride. But neither of them knew that the biggest truth of the day had not yet surfaced. The final reveal was still waiting in the shadows of the studio, ready to change everything. The studio looked different the next morning, even before anyone spoke. The technicians had arrived early, tightening every bolt, checking every cable, inspecting each metal fixture with slow, deliberate care. The air felt cleaner somehow, sharper, like the building itself had taken a deep breath after yesterday's near disaster. Yet beneath the clean surface, a quiet worry floated, something unspoken that everyone could feel but no one dared name. Sandra stepped onto the set with calm determination. She held her script in one hand, but her other hand rested lightly against the strap of her bag where the printed email still remained. She did not look tired today. She looked steady, resolved. The weight that had frightened her yesterday had settled into a new kind of strength inside her, quiet but firm. She had spent the night thinking about everything, the announcement, the reactions, the sabotage, the fear she carried, and she had decided something important. She would not shrink herself to make others comfortable. Not today, not ever again. Keanu walked beside her, matching her steps without needing to ask how she felt. He could see it in her posture, the shift from trembling uncertainty to clear, steady courage. He nodded to her gently, an unspoken encouragement. She nodded back. It was enough. The director approached them and explained that the investigation into the loosened clamps had revealed something unsettling. Someone with access to the rigging had tampered with the equipment. Security footage had captured a blurry figure moving around the lights at dawn before call time. The image was unclear, but the outline matched someone from the production office rather than the technical crew. That detail changed everything. It meant the act had intention. Someone had made a choice. A dangerous choice. The director then lowered his voice and said they had privately questioned several people. One of the senior producers had grown increasingly nervous during that conversation. Eventually, he admitted something. He had voiced strong concerns to an assistant about the budget and investor pressure after Sandra's announcement. He had made remarks suggesting that a small wake-up call might push Sandra to reconsider her role. He insisted he did not mean harm, that he never asked anyone to tamper with equipment. He claimed his words had been twisted or misunderstood, but the connection was clear. His frustration had created a dangerous ripple. Someone had acted on it. Sandra felt a wave of shock move through her. She had prepared herself for unkindness, for fear-based decisions, for difficult conversations. But she had not imagined that someone's careless frustrations could lead to a real physical threat. She took a slow breath, pressing her hand to her chest for a moment. Keanu watched her carefully, ready to step closer if she needed support. The head of security assured her that the situation had been handled. The assistant who had carried out the sabotage had been removed from the project. The senior producer had been put on suspension pending further review. The studio executives were alerted, and new safety protocols were being put in place. Sandra thanked them, her voice steady, though inside she felt a mixture of relief and lingering hurt. As the morning continued, the crew gathered around the main set for a team meeting. The director asked everyone to put away their equipment and give their full attention. The room grew quiet as Sandra stepped forward. She had not planned to speak, but she realized this moment needed her voice. She began slowly, her tone gentle. She told them she had shared her condition because she believed honesty created trust, not fear. She admitted the past day had been difficult, more difficult than she expected. She acknowledged the accident, the investigation, and the pressure that had been created by misunderstandings and private frustration. But she also said something more meaningful. She said she did not blame the entire team for the actions of a few. She said fear was a powerful force, but kindness was stronger when people chose it consciously. Her voice softened as she thanked those who had supported her with sincerity. She mentioned the young technician who had spoken to her, the director's caution, and the many crew members who had shown concern without speaking it aloud. She reminded everyone that a film was built not on perfect conditions, but on unity, empathy, and understanding, especially on difficult days. The crew listened with full attention. Some looked emotional, some nodded gently. Some seemed relieved that she was speaking with so much grace, and then she stepped back, allowing herself one small breath before the meeting shifted. Keanu stepped forward next. He did not prepare a speech. He simply spoke from the quiet strength he carried so naturally. He said that courage did not always look loud. Sometimes it looked like a person standing calmly in front of a group and telling the truth even when their voice wanted to tremble. He said Sandra had shown that courage and that it deserved respect, not resistance. He said that fear-driven decisions harmed not just individuals but the spirit of the entire team. Then he added something that softened the entire room. He said standing beside someone in their difficult moments was not a heroic act. It was the simplest expression of humanity. The room grew still, the kind of stillness that came when people recognized something meaningful. The director ended the meeting with a promise. From that day forward, the environment would be kinder, safer, and more supportive. The project would continue with respect at its core. When the crew dispersed, many people approached Sandra directly. Some apologized for their earlier uncertainty. Some offered quiet words of solidarity. Some simply placed a hand over their heart and nodded, a gesture that spoke more than words could. Sandra felt a warmth rise inside her, the kind that slowly replaced fear with gratitude. As the set returned to work, Sandra stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The sunlight felt gentle on her skin. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel everything, the relief, the exhaustion, the strength she had gained. Keanu joined her a moment later, standing beside her just as he had throughout the day before. She opened her eyes and smiled softly at him. She thanked him not just for speaking up, but for staying present through every difficult moment. Keanu returned the smile. He told her the truth very simply. He said she had stood for herself with grace, and he had only done what a friend should do, no more, no less. The final weeks of filming unfolded with a new spirit on set. People moved with more care, more empathy, more awareness. Schedules adjusted smoothly. Tensions eased. And Sandra worked with renewed confidence, supported by a team that finally understood her humanity as deeply as her talent. On the last day of filming, during the wrap celebration, Sandra lifted a small glass of sparkling water and made a quiet toast. She said that sometimes the hardest announcements led to the most unexpected forms of strength. She said that when someone shared their truth, the most important thing another person could do was choose to stand beside them. She ended her toast by thanking the entire team for choosing kindness in the end. The room filled with heartfelt applause. Laughter rose. The atmosphere shimmered with relief and unity. Sandra looked across the crowd and found Keanu watching her with a warm, gentle smile. She returned the smile, knowing that everything she had survived in the past days had been shaped differently because he had stood with her, not in front of her, not behind her, but right beside her. And that simple act had changed everything.